In this video, we're gonna go through the useEffect hook used in a functional component when coding with the React.js. This is a document I made. I'll link this URL in the description. This is where I got my content from, and this is just my summary of it. Okay, you can think of the useEffect hook as component did mount, component did update, and component will on mount combined. These are just lifecycle methods used inside a class-based component, right? So the component did mount runs after the first mount. Component did update runs after each update, and component will on mount runs when the component on mounts. And the useEffect hook is just a combination of these, or it does the same functionality as these lifecycle methods combined. Normally, useEffect hook runs after each render. In this respect, it is similar to component did mount and component did update. We have a look at code here. This is a class-based component. It defines a component did mount, and it updates the document title. It also defines component did update, and it does the same thing. It just updates the document title. So in this code, this is same as defining a single useEffect hook that runs after each render. First when it mounts, and after each update. We'll get into it next. But first, it is bad practice to cause side effects inside render, that is, inside the render method here. This is what will be rendered to the DOM. We want to do it after each render, so we don't put it here. We don't put the effect here. We put it inside the lifecycle methods instead. So in a class component, we typically define it inside lifecycle methods, component did mount and component did update. So in effect, in the above class example, we update the document title after each render. That's the effect of defining these two lifecycle methods. You may notice duplicate code in both lifecycle methods. They all update the document title. But in class components, there is no other choice but to use these lifecycle methods, even though they do the same thing. They all update the document title. However, we can do better in functional components using useEffect hook, as we'll see next. So this is an example of a functional component using the useEffect hook. The effect is the same. The effect of that is to change the document title as above, but just defines a single useEffect definition. It doesn't do anything else, but it has the same effect of the above. It has the same effect as defining the component did mount and component did update in a single definition. So the useEffect call above does the same thing as the class example. It updates document title after first mount and then after subsequent updates. In other words, after each render. This is important. We don't think in terms of lifecycle methods when using the useEffect. We think it in terms of each render. And this is a minor point. It is placed inside the component. What it means is, this example, the useEffect call is placed inside the functional component. It's not placed outside of it, or maybe over here. And the reason is, in this way the count variable is not stale, or stale means it's not properly updated. It retains the old value when used. So you want access to this count variable here. That's why you put it inside the functional component. Okay, so this is the what we've been talking about. We define a state variable called count, and then we use it inside our effect, right? Notice that a function is passed to the useEffect call. That is this, in this case, this arrow function over here. This is our effect. In this case, we update the document title. So this function passed inside the useEffect is our effect. Under the hood, our effect is deemed different on every render, even though here it has the same definition. Every time we re-render, we schedule a different effect, replacing the previous one. And this is how this is just how React works. In this way, we can guarantee that our count variable is never stale, and we can associate our effect to a particular render. So even though it does the same thing, it has the same effect on each render, it perceives the schedule effect as different from the previous render. It's just the way it works on the hood. Okay, and as we mentioned, by doing this, we guarantee that the count that we use here is always the new one. Okay, now sometimes our effect needs a cleanup. What's a cleanup? I'll get to it next. In this section, we will use an example of subscription to an online service. After we subscribe to the service, we want to unsubscribe from it afterwards. Here, the act of unsubscribing is our cleanup. And this is our code. This is a class-based component again, so we use the lifecycle methods, not the hook. And so so at the beginning, when it first mounts, it subscribes the friend, and when it unmounts at the end, it unsubscribes it. Okay, so it's pretty simple. Okay, in the above example, we subscribe to a friend status once after the first render, and then does nothing when it updates, and then unsubscribes it once after unmounting. Okay, but this is an important point here. Okay, but what if the friend ID changes after first subscribing the initial friend? Then there's an error, because we will unsubscribe a wrong friend at the end. Because what it means is, okay, so you subscribe the first friend with this friend ID, and as the app runs, maybe the friend ID changes, but then we haven't defined component.update over here, so we will retain the friend ID as the old one. So after it unmounts, you will try to unsubscribe it from the old friend ID, but this value has changed, so it causes an error because it can't unsubscribe from an old. Well, it's not intended. You will try to unsubscribe from the old ID, not the updated one. So it's not what you want. It leads to unexpected results. So yeah, so then there's an error because we will unsubscribe a wrong friend at the end, as I explained. To address this, we need to define component.update too. Inside it, we need to check if the friend ID has changed, and if so, unsubscribe that old friend and subscribe a new friend. We'll get to this later also. Okay, let's implement this using hooks. So here's an effect. The indentation is broken, sorry about that. So this is our effect. First we subscribe it, and then look at this, it returns a function called cleanup. This is our cleanup, and as I said, it unsubscribes your friend. What's the difference between this one and the hook one is that it will subscribe and unsubscribe after each render. Okay, not just at the end. It unsubscribes it at the end, but it unsubscribes it after each render, and that is called a cleanup. So there's a difference here. You're trying to unsubscribe it only at the end, but by definition of a useEffect hook, these effect will run after each render, including the cleanup. Okay, we'll get to it later, and you'll make it more clearer. Okay, so you may notice that this time function cleanup is returned from our effect. This is our cleanup. Okay, the difference between the previous class implementation and this one is that using effects, we clean up after each render, not just when it unmounts. Good thing about using hooks is that we can separate unrelated logic into separate effects. So here we got two different states, and for each state, two different separate useEffect. So we got two useEffect here. First one, the effect is it updates the document title. The second one, it subscribes and unsubscribes a friend. So here you can see two effects are used, one for updating the document title and then the other for managing friend subscription. So this is more logical than the class-based one. Okay, so let's go back to using hooks for friend subscription of the example. So this is the same thing, including the cleanup. So it subscribes and unsubscribes it. This is what happens in sequence. An example, if we start with the ID of 100, it subscribes it when it mounts, and when the friend ID updates with 200, look at this. Before doing anything else, it unsubscribes the friend with ID 100 and then subscribes the friend with ID 200. And then if the friend ID changes again, then it unsubscribes the ID 200 and then subscribes ID 300. And at the end, when the component unmounts or the app finishes, it unsubscribes the ID 300. So that's how it works. So you can see first the cleanup happens after each render, and second, cleanup happens before the next effect is run. Okay, so this is next effect, but before you run that, you do the cleanup first. Okay, now the dependencies. the logic used on our previous effect is a bit redundant because it unsubscribes an old friend and subscribes a new friend after each update. Ideally, we want to unsubscribe a friend and subscribe a new one only when we are dealing with a different friend ID. To do that, we pass an array as a second argument to the useEffect. In this case, we set props.friend.id, and this is called dependency. In this case, it tells the useEffect to run the effect only when the friend ID changes. Okay, so on array passed as a second argument to useEffect is our dependency. In this case, the friend ID. The effect will run on update only when the friend ID changes. Okay, so React will rerun the effect if just one of the dependencies has changed. So if you have another item inside the array, and if just one of them change, then the effect will be run. It doesn't have to be all of them, just one of them is sufficient. Okay, so this is equivalent to the following. Okay, so this is the component did update with the previous props as its argument. So you can access the previous props from here. So this is important only when the friend ID has changed. So if the previous friend ID doesn't equal the current friend ID, then do the unsubscribing and subscribing here. This is the same as passing a dependency over here. Okay, so this is what I talked about. The component did update. How do you emulate what's done here? The dependency. Okay, so lastly, maybe we want to run the effect when a component mounts and unmounts, but not when it updates. Remember, this is equivalent of defining component did mount and component will unmount, but not component did update. We can achieve this by setting the dependency as an empty array, like below. So here, over here. So in this case, what will happen is it will subscribe to your friend, and then each update do nothing, and when it unmounts, you will unsubscribe it, which is a cleanup. So now we will subscribe when it mounts, then won't do anything when it updates, then unsubscribe when it unmounts. Okay, so this is basically the same as basically same as here. It defines what to do when it mounts and when it unmounts, but it doesn't specify anything when it updates. So this is the same effect. Okay, so you can click on this to go to more detail. Well, this covers everything in here, but anyway, if you want more, and I will also link this document in the description. Alright, thank you very much, guys. I hope you had a nice Christmas, and God bless, and have a safe and happy New Year. Thank you.